George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Katya and Luba are being kicked off Strictly Come Dancing. I haven't known anyone on Strictly Come Dancing since Anton Dek, but like Sergey and Alexander and little Oleg, they're being kicked off because they are Russian, just like Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky. I have offered to adopt them, like I've adopted Sergey and Alexander and little Oleg, but my wife won't let me, and you'll see why when their picture comes up on the screen. The war goes on, although it might be now coming to a close. It is a proxy war between NATO, which really means the United States, and Russia, ready to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. But the signs are that the war is coming to a conclusion, and a settlement will either be reached by negotiation or by a Russian victory. We'll be talking about all of this with a range of distinguished experts, but also about how the tectonic plates have shifted in just the last couple of weeks. It's not the world that we inherited a couple of weeks ago. All is changed utterly. I don't know if it's a terrible beauty or any beauty at all that is being born, but one thing is for sure, it's a different world now after the war with Ukraine. Fasten your seatbelts. This is the 1.2 million strong audience of the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Some of it, of course, is so absurd as to be funny. Katya and Luba have done nothing wrong. They're ballroom dancers on a BBC ballroom dancing competition called Strictly Come Dancing. But according to that organ of wisdom, the Sun newspaper in England, they are to be kicked off the show. There they are there. You can see why my wife won't let me adopt them. So it's just me, Sergey and Alexander, the meerkats, and their little boy, Oleg, that are in our house now. Although, if you're prepared to take a Ukrainian into your house, that's after not being able to spend Christmas with your own parents and being told to mask up everywhere you go, you're now going to get £350 a month, thank you, from the state if you take a Ukrainian into your house, into your spare bedroom. £350 a month will not even pay the increase in electricity and gas, never mind any food that they happen to consume. You're not being paid for taking a veteran off the streets here in Britain or a homeless person off the streets in Britain. You're not being paid to take an Afghan or a Syrian refugee. But as we all know by now, Ukrainians are people like us, from a civilized country like us, as opposed to those countries that merely invented the number zero, invented algebra, had street lighting when we were painting our faces blue and living in the forest. You know, these uncivilized tribes that we have been waging war on. In case of Iraq and Afghanistan, total war. In the case of Afghanistan, a 20-year war. And even the poor hirelings that worked for our occupation are continuing to be locked out of access to Britain and the United States. And the Afghan people, including those that worked for our occupation, are enduring a bitterly cold winter and starvation conditions. There's no one raising £100 million plus for them. There's no one lighting up the Eiffel Tower and Wembley Stadium in their colours. There are no police helicopters flying overhead in the colours of Ukraine. Brighton are not allowed to wear their away football strip because it's blue and yellow when they weren't away. The way in which this whole Ukraine crisis has been militarized has been a master class in war propaganda, in war psychosis. The banning of Dostoevsky, the banning of Tchaikovsky, the Philharmonic Orchestra in Cardiff cancelling their series of Tchaikovsky concerts, even though both Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky died in the 19th century. What they have got to do with events in Ukraine in 2022 is, of course, absurdly ridiculous and impossible to answer. But that's the kind of world we're living in now. Russian community centers in New York are being attacked. Russians are being told, like Katya and Luba, that they must denounce their own country or lose their jobs. This has happened all over Europe and North America. It has reached the most absurd stage, but the calculation is beginning to come in. I said yesterday, and I stand by it, it's purely anecdotal, not scientific at all, but based on a mass canvass in the city of Birmingham, done for the local elections by the Workers' Party of Britain. Not only are the working class people in the estates in Birmingham either unmoved by the government's propaganda offensive or are positively repelled by it, not least because they saw their gas bills and their petrol bills multiplying in front of their eyes even before the war in Ukraine began. And they're well aware that bills that have tripled are about to triple again. And I want to put it to you seriously, that bills, cost of living bills in Britain, and I think in the United States, will very soon become literally unpayable. Your bills will be far greater than your wages, your salary, or your benefits. You will not be able to drive your car. We're headed for £10 per gallon. Cutely, they no longer measure the price in gallons, but some of us are old enough to be able to do the maths. £10 a gallon means you can't drive anywhere. Someone like me that drives for work will simply not be able to do so. And of course, public transport remains in a state of shambles. The price of domestic heating, cooking, when the summer comes, the price of air conditioning, the price of aviation, the price of trains, everything is going to rocket up so quickly and high that it will become literally unpayable. And the jury's out on who the British and American people will blame for that. Joe Biden's clear enough. This inflation is Putin's inflation. Well, even if that were true, and it is not true, the American people may judge, well, there's nothing we can do about Putin, but we can do something about you, Joe, in November in the midterm elections. They may decide in the local elections in Britain, we can't do anything about Putin, but we can do something about the British government that has led us over the cliff after a senile old buffer, Joe Biden, in Washington, for no good reason, and certainly no reason of national self-interest. And people can see the bills stretched out ahead of them, not just their own personal domestic bills, but the wrecked economy that the great conscious uncoupling with Russia and the East is going to necessarily create. And I want to spend time talking about that tonight. We'll talk about the war, of course. We'll talk about the 200 foreign mercenaries, that one of the mercenaries, a Brazilian, come all the way from Brazil for $2,000 a day to be a mercenary and had to run for his life and 200 of his fellows lost their lives in the last 24 hours. On a NATO base, imagine. Mercenaries, foreign mercenaries on a NATO base. How did they get in? We'll talk about all of that and the war situation itself. But I want to change gear or change direction in terms of what all of this is going to mean. I'm a great believer in the Chinese saying that sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. And I am absolutely convinced that the great uncoupling, the savage sanctions, as they call them, they keep telling you they're not against the Russian people, though they're banning Russian people off the television. They're even banning dead Russians from having their music performed in concert. They are crushing the living standards they believe of the people of Russia. It's a strange way of showing that you've got nothing against ordinary Russians. But what about if it's a boomerang? What about if it is going to hit us much harder than it's going to hit them? It already is. In the aforementioned rocketing price of gas and of petrol and diesel, and that's just for starters. Russia has forbidden the export to a list of countries, you could probably guess the countries, of the raw materials and commodities which they produce in abundance. Russia is the biggest producer of wheat in the world, but none of it is coming to the West. And so the price of wheat is going to go through the roof. The London Metal Exchange had to shut down on Friday because of the collapse in prices of some commodities and suspicious rise in the price of some others, because, of course, Russia produces all kinds of vital components of semiconductors and other technological and manufacturing products in the West. The Russians are not just an extraction economy, despite what you've been told. They are the biggest producers of nickel, of neon, of all kinds of things that are vitally important in the manufacturing processes, which will now have to either pay through the roof for alternatives, if alternatives exist, or will have to stop producing, throwing large numbers of people out of work. And then there's the banking crisis that is rapidly coming down the pipe. Older viewers will know of the crash in 2008 and the devastation and more than a decade of austerity that produced in the economies of the West. There's another banking crisis coming because the wizards that run our affairs have completely uncoupled Russia from the hitherto Western-dominated banking system. That doesn't mean Russia no longer has a banking facility. It just means they've signed up with the Chinese banks instead. But the consequent de-dollarization between countries like India, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, and China will lead to a dramatic fall in the value of the dollar. And the United States doesn't have the domestic manufacturing capacity to actually turn that into a good thing because, like the West of Europe, the United States is heavily dependent, even to wipe their backside, on products that are coming from the East, which will no longer come. Everything that Russia produces will now be bought by the East. Nothing that Russia produces will be sold to the West. So we've got a manufacturing, an energy, and very soon a banking crisis that will shake Western economies and, I think, perhaps Western societies to their very timbers. Now, I've 5 times used the word West. It's a misnomer, as we, I think, are quickly about to find. Only 10% of the population of the world are Westerners. 90% are not. They're either Easterners, India and China being the most populous of Eastern countries, but many countries of the East, like Indonesia with hundreds of millions of people in their populations, or Africa to the south, or South America to the south. 90% of the world does not live in the West. Just 10% do. And in fact, a staggering statistic is that white Europeans constitute 8% of the population of the world. And only 3% of the children of the world, 3% of the children of the world are Westerners, live in Europe or North America. This great shift, this tectonic shift in power and wealth and influence in the world is going to change everything utterly. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, have you ever heard of it? That's a surprise because it groups together the populations of 50% of the world. It groups together 50% of the wealth of the world. The sun is rising in the East. It didn't have to sink in the West. We could have had two suns cooperating with each other to make each other shine more brightly. But the idiots that run our affairs have decided that instead of cooperation, they want confrontation, and they are going to lose it. And they're already losing it right in front of our eyes. Iran last night landed 7 missiles on the American consulate in Baghdad, where incidentally every person, Sunni and Shia, is on the side of Russia in this confrontation with NATO. I wonder how, I wonder why that happened. Did America respond to 7 Iranian missiles landing on their consulate? Of course they did not. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard that fired the missiles said they were firing them at Israeli bases inside the American consulate. Was that true or not? I don't know. Has anyone responded and explained? The balance of power in the world is shifting in front of our eyes. Joe Biden had to send plenipotentiaries to Caracas to beg Nicolas Maduro, the man they put a bounty on his head of millions of dollars, dead or alive, had to send people to Caracas to beg Maduro to up oil production, to stop the rampant inflation in energy prices in the US. It failed, of course, not least because the United States recognizes someone completely different as the president of Venezuela. Somebody called Juan Guaido, to whom they forced courts all around the Western world to hand over billions of dollars of gold belonging to the Venezuelan people, to somebody called Juan Guaido, who's now shrieking, "Hey, what about me? You're about to find Mr. Guaido, just like the puppet regime in Kabul that fled as you fled. You're about to find that you, like the Afghan people, were entirely dispensable. You were being used and abused." And the same is true of Juan Guaido. India is being excoriated because it has taken a stand with Russia in this crisis. Most of the African countries abstained in the General Assembly of the United Nations because Africa knows there was never a Russian Congo, there was never a Chinese Côte d'Ivoire. It was the European countries that occupied and looted Africa, even of its people. Russia and China never occupied anywhere in Africa. And, of course, in Latin America, where every single country, from Mexico down to Chile, has as its major trading partner, its biggest trading partner, the People's Republic of China, you won't find any takers, left, right, or center, for seeking to gang up on what will now be the center of the world. You can call it Eurasia. Russia will no longer be at the periphery of Europe and the periphery of Asia. It will be at the heart of Eurasia. Eurasia is where it's at, ladies and gentlemen. Your children will grow up in a world where not the West, but Eurasia is where it all happens. All my children go to Chinese school. It's not too late for you to join in. Buckle up. For the next 2.5 hours or more, we're going to be debating all of these issues, because this is the biggest political show on the planet. 3 consecutive million-plus audiences. And last Sunday's, now topping 1.2 million. So you're in good company here. You're certainly in big company. Bigger than any other political show that you have ever heard of. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Yo, Mikey, what's happening? Joey, the usual? Sure. You looking fresh, man. You get a new haircut? Nah, brother. I just got that, scholarship from the College of Knowledge. Oh, you got into the University of the Airwaves? Sure did, brother. I got knowledge coming out of my ears. GG, man. He knows what's up. I knew there was something new about you. Yo, reckon you take me? Everyone is welcome, brother. Even from Jersey.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Now, if you want to call the show tonight, there'll be extra time for callers tonight. If you're in the UK, remember it's completely free to call the show. 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States or Canada, it's also toll free, so it will cost you nothing at all. It's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can email the show at onair@moats.tv. We've got a poll already running. Would the US allow Zelensky to agree a deal with Russia? A, yes. B, no. Get voting on my Twitter account, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. And now, to our first guest of the evening. He is, quite simply, without peer in the United States. He's like me, but he's better than me. And he's been doing this longer than me. He is the YouTube sensation, the one and only Jimmy Dore. Jimmy, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Wonderful to see 2 hatted men on the screen. You and I are about the last men standing. They seem to be shooting everyone else down. What do you account for our success?
Well, first of all, I just got to tell you, it is exhausting doing this better than you. It really takes it out of me. And I'm going to go back to not doing it as good as you. So then you can be the best one. So, because you know how hard that is. So anyway, they can take me out whenever they feel like it, I guess, because I've had threats. YouTube has already had meetings with me and stuff like that. And so they've just announced, YouTube just announced the other day that if you trivialize the war, that they can use that to take your channel down. So the point is they can take you down whenever they feel like it. We know that now. And so if you were wondering how they would have censored people during the WMD's Iraq war period, this is how they would do it. They would say, you can't trivialize something. And so they're saying, so I'm a comedian by trade. That's what I've done for the last 25 years. And so I trivialize everything with jokes. That's what they could say. So at any point, they can take you down from. So why they haven't, I don't know. But the good thing is I don't need someone to give me a job. So I'm not looking for a job, right? And I didn't come up through the news business or the corporate world. I came in through the nightclubs. Doing stand-up comedy. And so I'm not looking to make friends in this space in journalism or news reporting. And so it frees me up to be better than them in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm barely even trying.
Well, if that's what you achieve through barely even trying, it's their problem if you really get into your stride, because you have specialized in lampooning the pompous and the hypocrites, the warmongers, the merchants of war, the masters of war, to use Bob Dylan's phrase. But they're ruling the world, at least for the minute. I personally think their days are numbered. That much doesn't surprise me, Jimmy. But what surprises me is how the Liberals have gone full turtle. They are now amongst the most belligerent voices to be found anywhere. And they, of course, control big tech. They're all liberals in big tech. And they've turned out to be tyrants more than any right-wing tyrant we ever knew in the past.
So, I mean, the way you keep control is you control the narrative. And how do you control the narrative? You do censorship. And how do you sell censorship? You say it's for the people's own protection. It's the oldest trick in the book. Every tyrant does the same thing. And so, you know, who are you not allowed to criticize is the people who rule you. I don't know, some smart person said that. And so who aren't you allowed to? And so now they get to decide what's true, what's not. And look at all the things just around the coronavirus that turned out to be false, that you weren't allowed to question. You weren't allowed to question if the virus came from a lab. You weren't allowed to question if the masks worked or didn't work. You weren't allowed to do all these things. And that turned out you weren't allowed to. So Fauci lies about herd immunity. They lied about ivermectin. They made it seem like it was a horse poison. It turns out to be one of, a Nobel Prize winning medicine. And once you find that out, and then you start looking, you find out they're lying about everything. And so, again, we're not a democracy in the United States. So the idea that we're an oligarchy run by capitalists. And so if you see the United States in a war somewhere else, it's almost guaranteed we're there for capitalism. And exactly what's happening in Ukraine right now is about energy and hegemony and imperialism. And so you only get one side of the story told in American press. And now they're going to make it okay to censor us. By the way, Facebook just said it was okay to praise Nazis.
They did. They also said, and in fact, the man that signed the memo is literally a liberal Democrat. He was the leader of the Liberal Democrats in Britain. He was the deputy prime minister for a brief and inglorious period. He actually signed the memo that gave the permission to call for the death of people, Russians, for this limited period. Not a right that's been given to anybody in any other conflict, either one that's still running or has run in the past. This is my point about the Liberals. See, in the past, the big moguls that owned the TV stations and the newspapers, the Liberals were on our side saying, hey, don't censor us. This is an abuse of your power. But now the Liberals are doing it.
Well, it's great. Yeah, I agree. It's nuts. You thought authoritarianism be always equated with the right. But there is no left. See, I've lived in America, but there really is no left in America, especially in government. It's two right-wing parties, and they both are beholden to the military-industrial complex, big pharma, and big tech. And so they've just farmed out censorship to private corporations. And so now if you say, hey, you're censoring me, they go, no, it's only censorship if the government does it. But I adhere to the principle that came out of the Enlightenment period. You're against censorship no matter where it comes from, whether it comes from the state or it comes from the religion or from a corporation. And so they've just farmed out censorship. And censorship, has there ever been a problem that censorship ever fixed?
Well, no. And of course, self-censorship, what Francis Bacon called the arrow that flies in the night, nobody ever sees it, but people bite their tongues or stub their finger just short of the keyboard. They don't write or ask questions for fear of the consequences for them. So self-censorship, big tech censorship, and state censorship, because no one can doubt that the state is driving the tech companies to do this. And as I've said, Nick Clegg, Sir Nick Clegg, if you don't mind, is himself a creature of government in Britain and a Facebook executive. So the point you've made too, you alluded to Iraq, and then you stated certain contentious positions that you had taken over the coronavirus, none of which are contentious anymore. So if I had said in 2003 on Facebook, there are no weapons of mass destruction and this entire thing is a hoax, I would have been taken down and stopped from saying it. The questions that you raised about the efficacy of things like masks and so on are now commonplace. It's perfectly obvious. You've got politicians in one picture. Let me give you an example. Trudeau was meeting the British Prime Minister in a mask, and in another picture he was meeting the 96-year-old Queen of England who just had COVID without a mask. And he was hovering like he was about to plant a kiss on the end of her nose. That's how close he was to her. This whole absurdity is now a joke. And if you can't lampoon it, then to what extent are we a free country?
So we're not a free. Well, I don't know about your country, but I know my country, we only have as much freedom as the corporation will allow you. I mean, we only have 6 huge corporations that control all of our media, and they're all funded by the people they're supposed to be investigating and exposing. And that's why a schmuck like me, a nightclub comedian, can come into their space and do a better job. Right now, if you're getting the news in the United States from the corporate news, which is where everybody gets it, almost, then you're being misinformed. You don't know anything about what's happening in Ukraine, really. You think that Vladimir Putin just decided to flip out for no reason and start bombing people. You don't know that we helped institute a coup, a pro-West coup in Ukraine. And 8 years ago, we brought in, and then there's a bunch of people in that country who didn't want to live under a coup, and they didn't want to go along with that. And so what did the Ukrainians do? They got Nazis to start bombing the Donbass, and they wouldn't stop for 8 years, even though there's an agreement that said they would. And so this is, no one's justifying war. I'm anti-war no matter where it comes from, and I condemn Putin for invading. But this was predicted that was going to happen for 20 years because of NATO encroachment. This wasn't predicted by me. It was predicted by former ambassadors to the UN or former people who worked for the State Department. It was predicted by all the scholars who looked into this. So this was, this isn't, but it's being reported in the United States as if this is all new and it came out of nowhere, and that we're at the threat of nuclear war because Putin didn't take his antidepressant medicine or something. And that's, of course, every time the United States, by the way, right now, the United States is occupying 1/3 of Syria, and no one even mentions that.
And our bombs are raining down on Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East.
Right. So we're not going to get our oil from Russia. We're going to get it from Saudi Arabia. So we could feel good about ourselves and sleep at night. Saudi Arabia is committing a genocide right now in Yemen, and with our help.
And chopped the heads of 81 people in one day yesterday.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. Well, it's always a party.
81 beheadings in a single day. Even ISIS never reached these kind of levels. So we're begging. Biden said that he regarded MBS, the Crown Prince, as a pariah, and he was going to reset America's relations with Saudi Arabia. Now he's begging him to take a phone call to up the output of the oil industry. Just in the time left available, Jimmy, I wanted to touch on something you again alluded to there, and that's the rewriting of history. Maddo, Mad for short, on whatever station she's on, Rachel Madd, on the television yesterday, and a guy called McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Moscow. He said, and then they tweeted, without attributing it to him, so coming from them, that Hitler never used chemical weapons, when in fact he industrially annihilated millions of Jews and millions of others in literal gas chambers. How's that for rewriting history?
So they've stooped to manufacture consent for this war in Ukraine that's raising everybody's gas prices, and they're pretending that we're paying higher gas prices for freedom and liberty. So to stoop to manufacture consent in the United States for that, they've stooped now at MSNBC and Rachel Maddow on her show to praising Hitler. That's what they're doing. They're praising Hitler. I used to do a joke about that. No matter anybody who tells me I'm funny, I have a soft spot for him. Even if Hitler said, "Hey, Jimmy, I saw your show last night. It was very funny," I would be like, there's another side to that guy that people really never saw.
And that's what they did. Yeah, that's what
they did. A literal joke. They did it.
And they weren't joking. Speaking of jokes, how do you avoid lampooning a guy wandering around in his pajamas in the White House, not safe with the button on his dressing gown? Never mind the nuclear button. How do you not lampoon that?
If they can make you, this is the power of propaganda. If they can make you think of Nobel Prize winning human medicine as horse poison, they can make you think the president of the United States is not demented. I mean, the guy gets stuck in a couch 3 times a day. I mean, come on, you're right. How do you not? I mean, he can't speak. Everybody knows it. It's like we're all in like this mass hypnosis. We're all pretending the president of the United States is of sound mind and body, and he's not. He's been AWOL for a long time.
Yeah, ask the Pope about the famous toilet incident in the Vatican. Jimmy Dore, you're a superstar, and I'm really grateful to you for making time to join with us tonight on the mother of all talk shows.
Well, I'm telling you, it's back on you now. You're the best there is out there, because I'm pulling back, and you enjoy it.
Keep on trucking, man. Thanks very much indeed. Would the U.S. allow Zelensky to agree a deal with Russia? A, yes, 25% on Twitter. No, 75% on Twitter. Yes, 21% on YouTube. No, 79%. And on Telegram, yes, 14%. No, 86%. How extraordinary are those numbers? Now, on this day in 1996, a lone gunman massacred 16 children and their teacher in a school gymnasium. Where did it take place? A, Dalkeith, B, Dunblane, C, Dunfermline. Answer after the break.
Comrade, tired of being trapped in mainstream media? Join the revolution with mother of all talk shows. Has been instrumental in making brain and heart of people stronger, like kettlebell for mind. Don't be brainwashed, CC, an open mind to new way of thinking. If you don't know how, George will teach you. If you won't learn, he will make you. Speak to Comrade Galloway if you think you're hard enough on the mother of all Talkshows.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
The massacre was, of course, in Dunblane. I remember it as if it were yesterday, and not all the questions that arose out of that incident have even yet been answered. The files, of course, have been locked away for a very great many years. Social media is enormous. Shan says, I'm happy that Russia is finally making steps to liberate the Donbass from oppression. Kevin Hughes says, Zelensky is just another Juan Guaido figure. He can't make decisions without his handlers say so. His love and concern for Ukraine is underlined by his purchase of a $35 million mansion in Miami. He'll soon be off to enjoy the $1.2 billion fruits of his labors that are currently squirreled away in the Costa Rican branch of the Dresdner Bank in Latin America, leaving the people of Ukraine to pick up the pieces. That's pretty good money for a comedian. 1.2 billion. And Gaza West says the US wants another Libya or Syria on Russia's doorstep. It serves their interests to plant some presence in the region to keep pressure on them. And Exile says he isn't allowed to do a deal. The US won't let him. The war is a distraction for the US government woes at home. And Global Thumb 37 says, I think the question is, would the neo-Nazis and the right-wing militias allow the Western puppet Zelensky to negotiate with Russia? That's a very good point. It's not just that the US might not allow Zelensky to make a deal, but the fear of literally being murdered by the ultra-right in Ukraine itself might be one of the more powerful dangers. We're going to go to Nottingham in a minute, but one or two more. Javier says Zelensky will agree to a deal. He has no other real option. The US will make anything they can to delay it. Ian Muir says, yes, what options do they have, George? They will have to deal. Life is all about having a deal. The Ukrainian people are prepared to die, but who would allow that and call themselves a leader? And Rosemary Clancy says, no, the world might stand a chance at peace if the US didn't exist. All my life, that godforsaken country has been at war or causing others to go to war with one another. The international community should come together and force it off the world stage. Shall we go to Colin? Colin in Nottingham. Go ahead, Colin.
Hello, George.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
I'm 83 years of age, lived in Nottingham all my life.
Okay.
And I'm totally disgusted with my government, Boris Johnson's government, for sending arms and ammunition and rockets to Ukraine that has got fascists and neo-Nazis killing Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens.
Did you ever think, Colin, you're a man of years, and therefore you lived through the Second World War. Did you ever imagine that Britain, which in 1940 stood alone against the Nazi hordes, would end up in alliance, open alliance, with the swastika-flying, SS insignia wearing Nazis in Ukraine? Did you ever imagine that?
Nazi salute and use the swastika. But at the same time, I refuse to watch BBC News, ITV News and Sky News. Not once since this Ukraine crisis have they mentioned that for 8 years Ukrainian soldiers have been killing 14,000 Ukrainian-speaking people because they speak Russian. They get fined and sent to prison for it. I'm totally disgusted.
Well, that's a very powerful call. It's the call of the night. It's the first call of the night, but I'll not be surprised if it turns out to be the call of the night by the end of the show. Now, my next guest is Lee Barrett, who's an independent journalist, broadcaster, and above all, perhaps a China expert. I'm glad that Lee can join us now on the mother of all talk shows. Lee, thanks for joining us. I don't know if you heard my opening remarks, but I was essentially saying that, in a sense, this Ukraine conflict has acted as the midwife for something new and important in the world, something in which China will become the preeminent force in the world. A Eurasian landmass from Russia to China, but bringing in countries like India, which is a gigantic economy and, of course, the second most populous country in the world. The tectonic plates are shifting, aren't they?
They absolutely are. I mean, you know, we see just before the Olympic Games that China released a statement with Russia to sort of talk about how they're you know, getting a closer relationship on things like that, and that's very much to stand up to what they see as the bullying of the US, because the US want to retain their hegemony, and it's causing them a huge problem that there's an economy that's, well, in purchasing power is already bigger than them, you know, so they've imposed all these sanctions on China. And, you know, I strongly feel that this whole Ukraine thing is just like an excuse so they can impose sanctions on Russia as well, you know.
Yeah, but it's pretty self-defeating, Lee, because, I mean, I've argued this for a long time, that as a matter of statecraft, to drive Russia and China ever closer together, to the point where you now could not slip sixpence between them, and that's not going to change, is a piece of madness from a Western statecraft point of view. It's not a mistake that Brzezinski or Kissinger ever made. They spent their whole lives trying to ensure that China and Russia were as far apart from each other as was possible.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, you know, this is almost like the unintended consequences of American policy, you know. They obviously tried to split Russia and Europe, but in doing that, they've pushed Russia closer to China. And I see all these Western companies fleeing Russia, and the country that's going to fill that gap is China, you know. I mean, Russia are energy sort of stable, they produce their own food, they've got no problems there, but there's going to be this huge hole in the market in Russia for consumer goods. Well, who are going to fill that? It's going to be China. And as regards energy, you know, you have the US saying that they won't buy Russian energy. Europe obviously can't because they're dependent on it, but China are able to take all the energy Russia have got to sell, and the wheat and the metals, you know. We haven't even seen Russian sanctions properly yet. Now, they could really harm Europe. And I see on you know, social media, all these people saying, oh, we stand with Ukraine and X, Y, Z. And yet I just wonder whether they'll still be standing with Ukraine when their household bills are, you know, 200, 250 pounds a month higher than they are now. I just think, you know, there are people scored a massive own goal.
Yeah, there are people whose energy bill is going to be bigger than their monthly income. People on benefits, for example. There are going to be companies that have to close because they, especially in the hospitality sector, so badly hit over the last 2 years by the COVID crisis, they simply won't be able to continue. There'll be all kinds of people who rely on diesel and petrol to move themselves and their goods around that will no longer be able to do it.
You know, I was speaking to a friend back in the UK yesterday, and in his area, it's the fuel is £1.70 plus per litre.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It is. It's over 170 almost everywhere now, and it'll be £2 a litre before very long, which is getting on for £9 a gallon, if you remember gallons. Now, if I'd told you or your dad that petrol would be £9 a gallon, he would say, I'm sure, that, well, we'll not be able to use the car.
Absolutely. I'm old enough to remember the controversy when it went to £1 a gallon in the UK. £1 a gallon, you know, and now we're at £8 or £9 a gallon. It's just unbelievable. And on top of that, this will add to the cost of the distribution of all goods. So not only companies are going to pay ridiculous amounts for their energy, because as you know, they are not subject to the Ofcom cap like domestic users. So the raw materials for food is going to cost more. The manufacture of food is going to cost more. The distribution of food is going to cost more. You know, the UK and Europe are in for a huge rise in food prices because of what they've done. And I honestly don't think, you know, when this sort of Russian-Ukraine situation started, it was like a race between the US, the UK, and Europe to see who could put the most sanctions the quickest. It was like a competition between them.
Yeah.
And I don't think they thought many of those sanctions through. And what I find amazing is that, you know, Europe are going to come out the worst here, the UK and Europe. And you know, I feel as though Europe and the UK have been thrown under the bus somewhat by the US.
Well, they threw themselves under the bus at the behest of the US. They didn't even have to be forced to. But you're absolutely right. The US is self-sufficient in energy. It has, or can be, at a certain price. It has, the prairie is an ample source of food, but that is not the case in Europe.
Absolutely, and I really think that the Europeans and the British have no idea what's coming down the pipeline. You know, they're all cheering on these sanctions, and I just think that they've really got they're in for a big shock because of this, and I think they will. Personally, I think they will try to sort of backpedal on some of those sanctions as time goes on, because the public are going to be very sort of angry.
Well, Russia might not allow them to. Russia's taking quite a hawkish attitude when I mean, the Russian people are going to be pretty healthy from now on, Lee. There's no Coca-Cola, there's no McDonald's, there's no Pornhub, and there's no CNN. It's going to be the cleanest place to live in the continent. But as soon as McDonald's pulled out, Russia nationalized all their property and is giving, I think, $500 million to small and medium-sized companies to come up with their own fast food industry. That's pretty smart going. Actually, the rate they're going, Russia will be much less capitalist than it was before this crisis began.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, Russia, I think the West thought these, you know, sanctions were going to sink Russia within weeks. And Russia are used to sanctions. You know, they've dealt with them before, and they'll deal with them again. And I think the West have, you know, the EU have already said they've maxed out their financial sanctions. Germany have completely shot themselves in the foot. You know, it won't be German cars going into Russia. It'll be Chinese cars. It won't be German consumer goods and European consumer goods. It'll be Chinese consumer goods. So I really think China are in a very strong position to fill that vacuum. And I think it's also interesting to cite the phone call that Blinken made to Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister. I think he probably wishes he didn't make that call, because China firmly told the US that China believes that it was squarely them that created this problem. And, you know, it's up to them to use diplomacy to sort this problem out and not add fuel to the fire, which is what they are doing. China very much sees that US are just pouring fuel on the flames by introducing more sanctions and continuing to suggest they're going to send billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine.
And don't forget the mercenaries, Lee. These mercenaries are increasingly the way of war of countries like the United States and others.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really seems from the actions of the US that they want to drag this war out for as long as possible. And as you you know, alluded to earlier, Biden, it's his perfect excuse now to hide what the problem is in America, inflation. Oh, it's Putin's fault. How the hell is it Putin's fault? It squarely sits with Biden, this one.
They're banking everything on that. I myself predict that it will not work. That people will say, well, is it Putin's fault? But even if it is, we can't do anything about him. But we can do something about you. And I feel that a lot of political turbulence is likely to occur in Europe, in Britain, which doesn't do much in the way of political turbulence, but even in the United States. Now, look, in the time we've got left, I'm fascinated by your story. You've got 340,000 subscribers, and you're in China. How did that happen? How did you get to China? How did you start blogging? And how did you get this enormous audience?
Okay, so I've been coming to China for 15 plus years, and I've lived here permanently for the last 4. And I started coming here initially on business. I was having products made at factories, and I kind of fell in love with China. It's an amazing country. And when I moved here, and as I was going back to visit family and friends in the UK, I saw this massive disconnect from what I was experiencing and seeing in China and what Western media were reporting about China. So we started vlogging, me and my son Ollie, we started vlogging about our experiences in China. And the Western media picked up on that, and pretty much we had the Times do an article on us, then followed by the BBC, then followed by the New York Times, all accusing us of being paid by the Chinese government to say good things about China. And that gave our channel massive exposure, and this, our subscribers mushroom from there. And it's absolutely ridiculous that the Western media have this view that anybody saying positive or good things about China can't possibly be saying it because that's what they think. They think that they can only be saying that because they're paid to or coerced to.
Well, they think everybody's like them. They're prostitutes. They write what their owner wants them to write. And they think everyone's like that.
Absolutely, George. I mean, the reality of it is we have much more freedom to report what we want to than most of those people working for mainstream media who have to follow the line of what their editors and ultimately the state wants them to write. I mean, we've just seen this with, the White House have just gathered a group of top influencers together to brief them. Yeah, to brief them on their line on the Russian-Ukraine situation. So who is now influencing the influencers, which is what we got accused of.
I'm not sure anybody of an age to be on TikTok is likely to be much persuaded by Joe Biden. I doubt if he even found the language in which to speak to them. Tell me, how do people follow you?
You can go to our channel. If you go to YouTube, just search Barrett, Barrett, and you'll find our channel.
Fantastic. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Lee. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, George.
Best regards to your boy also. Now, look, coming up in the next hour, we're making way for more of your calls after last week's show, which 1.2 million people watched. The number of callers who didn't get through was in the hundreds. So give us a call now. But after the news, we've got Pye Ian on the show with the latest on Ukraine. But I think it's almost time for the news. The news is coming to you from the one and only Mr. King. He's back. Would the US allow Zelensky to agree a deal with Russia? Yes, 25, no, 75. 5,600 people have now voted. You can vote for the rest of the show on my Twitter account, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, and on my Telegram. I'll be back after the news with the aforementioned Mr. King.
35 people have been killed and 134 wounded in an airstrike in Lviv, close to Ukraine's border with Poland. Foreign military staff were based at the Yavoriv military centre along with Ukrainian nationals. The centre is used by NATO countries to carry out training exercises, and the attack follows Russians' warnings that NATO supply lines would be targeted. Ukraine's Defence Minister Oleksiy Reznikov has said that the foreign military instructors work on the Lviv training site. A representative for the Ministry of Defence said that they are still trying to establish if any instructors were at the facility at the time of the attack. Reuters news agency says a witness saw more than a dozen ambulances heading in the direction of the attack. At just over 15 miles from the Polish and NATO border, it would appear to be the westernmost offensive action since the invasion began. Yesterday, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called Western arms convoys to Ukraine a legitimate military target. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees could come to Britain, and each local council will get more than £10,000 per individual. Households would take in refugees would also be given £350 a month. The Housing and Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, who is in charge of the Ukrainian refugee scheme, said that the UK has now processed more than 3,000 visas for Ukrainians fleeing the war with Russia. Britain's taking part in the Homes for Ukraine scheme will receive £350 a month as a thank you from the UK government. Gove said people wanting to offer up their homes and spare rooms can register their interest on Monday. However, Gove said he would not answer whether he would be offering up a room in his own house. Scotland's First Minister and her Welsh counterpart have proposed that both governments become super sponsors to Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war. Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford had written to the UK government to confirm their commitment in contributing to its community sponsorship scheme. Scotland and Wales have offered to step further to support refugees by acting as super sponsors. It is hoped that this would allow Ukrainians to come to the two countries faster. Elsewhere, a rabbi who helped Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich obtain his Portuguese citizenship has been told he cannot leave Portugal and must represent himself to authorities when required. Daniel Litvak was detained on Thursday as part of an investigation into how the former Chelsea football team owner's citizenship had been granted. The nationalisation process of several other Jewish people is also being investigated. On Friday, Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea Football Club, was sanctioned by the UK in response to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Most of the club's commercial activities have since been stopped. Coronavirus cases in China have tripled after a surge in infections in the northeast. Tighter controls have now been imposed on access to Shanghai as the country battles its worst outbreak for 2 years. Bus cities in the eastern port city of 24 million people have been suspended, and a negative COVID-19 test is required for anyone wanting to enter. Authorities reported that more than 1,900 new coronavirus cases on the Chinese mainland on Sunday, more than triple the previous day's total. Around 3/4 of those cases were in the Jin province in the northeast, where entry to the industrial city of Changchun has been suspended and families told to stay at home. A woman who ran an I Love Russia campaign in the United States has been charged with acting as an unregistered agent of the Russian government. Elena Branson, who has both an American and Russian citizenship, allegedly received tens of thousands of dollars from the Russian government to run the Russian Centre New York, which she founded in 2012. Prosecutors described the organisation as a propaganda centre that coordinated activities like an I Love Russia campaign promoting Russian history and culture, which was aimed at American young people. In other news, protesters demanding radical change to Britain's Metropolitan Police have marched through central London. Activities held traffic outside New Scotland Yard yesterday before marching to Charing Cross Police Station. They carried banners reading "Police are perpetrators." Protesters also set off bright blue smoke flares and activated 1,000 rape alarms. The protest marks a year since an unofficial gathering to pay respects to murder victim Sarah Everard saw clashes with police. It also came a day after judges ruled police breached the rights of the organisers of a planned vigil for Sarah Everard. Everard was murdered by a serving Metropolitan Police officer, Wayne Cousins. Saudi Arabia says it executed 81 men on Saturday, which is more than the whole of last year. The executed, including 7 Yemeni and 1 Syrian national, were convicted of multiple heinous crimes, including terrorism, according to state news agency SPA. Some were charged with belonging to the Islamic State group Al-Qaeda or the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Rights organisations say many do not receive fair trials in Saudi Arabia, an allegation the government rejects. Those executed were accused of plotting attacks on vital economic targets, killing or targeting members of the security forces. Other charges including kidnapping, torture, rape and smuggling weapons into the country. And finally, a poor labourer from India's Orissa state who turned to YouTube after work dried up during the COVID lockdown has become a social media star. When Isaac Munda uploaded his first YouTube video in March 2020, he was desperate. A nationwide lockdown imposed to curb COVID had brought India and the construction industry that employed him to a halt. It left workers like him who earned a daily wage struggling for a living. His children were watching a cartoon on YouTube when Munda overheard an advertisement on how people could earn money from the platform by uploading videos. So he scoured YouTube videos for tips and began with simple food videos. In his first video, Munda sits with a full plate of food, rice, dal, greens, a tomato and a chili, which he finishes in silence after greeting viewers. It didn't take off like he had hoped. He decided to give it another shot and opened a Facebook account and shared his videos there. This time, it worked. Around a dozen people watched them. Soon he had his first viral video in which he eats basi pakala, a fermented rice dish in Orsina. 2 years on his channel, Iska Munda Eating has more than 800,000 subscribers and his videos have been watched more than 100 million times. Now back to Moats, I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
6,000 people have voted already on our poll. Would the US allow Zelensky to agree a deal with Russia? You can vote for the rest of the show on my Twitter account, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe to that, and on my Telegram channel. Now, in my opening remarks, I talked about how the world was rapidly changing. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And in the last couple of weeks, I believe that decades have happened. In one spectacular case, Iran is about to re-enter the world after a long period of atrocious sanctions, savage sanctions, and violent attacks on their scientists, on their military, political leaders, and so on. And of course, the freezing of their assets all over the world. Billions of dollars of Iran's wealth have been frozen around the world. They've been cut off from the banking system. They were the prototype for the cutting off of the SWIFT system. And everyone thought that the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which Barack Obama signed on behalf of the United States, and then Donald Trump ripped up, kicked over the table and walked out, no one believed that that particular Humpty Dumpty could ever be put back together again, but it has been. And our next guest is a specialist, not just on Russia and China, but also on Iran. His name is Pye Ian. He's an independent economic and geopolitical researcher and an expert in geoeconomic trends between East and West for over 20 years. So he's just the man that we want to talk to. And I'm grateful, Pye, for you joining us this evening on the mother of all talk shows. Speak to the Iran issue first, if you would. Let's assume that the events overnight in Baghdad have not derailed the agreement that appears to be reached in Vienna to reinstate Iran into the world, to lift the sanctions and restart the JCPOA.
Thank you for having me on, George, and it's a pleasure. With regard to Iran, and just very briefly, my personal sentiment is that the demands made that will be made by the Iranian government will ultimately be deemed intolerable by NATO partners as well as their allies in turn, regionally or otherwise. And that is somewhat reflective of the fact that Iran, along with its closer Eurasian partners, have a game played out what has been happening over the past month or so well in advance, have had their demands acutely prepared with regard to the fallout resulting, and will signal to each other that they're not going to, quote unquote, necessarily sell each other out. So I think it'll be not as simplified as maybe some transatlantic corporate mainstream press may be making it out to be with regard to Iran, as well as Venezuela and others previously deemed as, quote unquote, rogue nations that all of a sudden now, in a 180-degree turn or near that, are being considered for a myriad of reasons to be re-engaged with. But I wanted to touch base about much deeper risks that are somewhat related to Iran, but more so to really kind of verboten issues between East and West. I traded precious metals commodities, both physical bullion, gold and silver, platinum and palladium, as well as on margin for years. Doing so, one gets a very on-the-tracks education or re-education away from theoretical finance and economics because of the finite physical nature of what said commodities are. So there's an aggressive currency war behind the Russia-Ukraine conflict, yet the stakes are so high that neither East nor West want details to be understood by wider markets or the masses. Very little of the $121 billion that Russian entities owe to Western banks is likely to be ever repaid now that war has started and unprecedented.
Might be repaid in rubles.
Well, that's questionable then with regard to financial institutions and their receptivity to non-dollar payment. That's really at the core of what's happening. These unprecedented sanctions that are applied are going to draw into question what the gamesmanship is going to be between not just Moscow, but its tightest partners, foremost Beijing, as well as the collective transatlantic, certainly financial community. International banks are owed more than that $121 billion amount by the Russian entities per the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland itself, which, as you know, is the central bank of central banks. And the BIS suspended Russia's membership just last Thursday, which is very telling. They're supposed to be, the central bank to everything and neutral and in Switzerland. So the U.S. and European Union have also blocked Russia's central bank from utilizing something like 40% of its $630 billion in reserves. Yet the overall amount of credit exposure that European banks per se could potentially experience is imminently devastating, in my opinion. One has to ask if these sanctions are purely punitive or if they're actually defensive moves, considering long-standing Russian and Chinese ambitions for usurping the 78-year-old global dollar reserve standard and the 49-year-old petrodollar reserve recycling standard following Nixon's closing of the gold window 51 years ago. I mean, the vast majority of the more than, I think, like 15 trillion with a T dollars worth of reserves held by nations are in paper and digital money, while a much, much smaller amount is held in gold and other investment assets. Yet with the exception of gold, the other reserve assets are someone else's liability ultimately, meaning someone like, the U.S. Treasury, who can just decide on a whim that they're not worth anything, often in scenarios involving economic or hot wars against deemed rogue nations, can throw that at those rogue nations. Now, what NATO allies have done by blocking Russian banks from accessing reserves is demonstrate the actual risk of holding paper or currency reserves for the rest of the world as well. These risks are driving Russian and Chinese pushes to buy physical money, i.e. gold, finite, physical, limited, tangible metal. You can't just suspend the meaning of money to a nation, especially one with low debt, I mean, endless natural resources, nukes, and rich friends like China, which is further internationalizing its own renminbi currency, mind you. So China will aggressively settle Russian energy trading in its own currency, moving away from dollar dependence, and tie it all to gold in partnership, again, with Russia. This has been years in the planning. Alternatives to the SWIFT money transfer system will be strengthened as a result of these newer sanctions as well. Chinese-Russian trade settlement in dollars had already dropped from 90% in 2015 to half of that in 2020. Western sanctions will further solidify the Russian-Chinese gold and oil money alliance, if you will. And both Eurasian nations have clearly, again, game played out, war gamed out recently how to speed it all up. Here's the danger as far as institutions are concerned. Kinetic currency war moves faster than what existing financial transaction settlement intermediation chains can keep up with, making it hard to know exactly what and where risk exposures remain in the actual financial system. So domino effects can thus be delayed but still prove catastrophic. Hence why Deutsche Bank's stock dropped, not coincidentally, nearly 40% over the past month alone. It's all going to spiral out of control for transatlantic financial institutions, and a solvency crisis rivaling 2008's financial crisis will more than likely result, at the very least. Financial contagion can and will spread, considering obscene levels of opaque derivatives exposure in the tens of trillions of dollars plaguing the largest bulge bracket banks, and the fact that tactically suppressed gold and silver prices will need to adjust much higher, which in turn will tweak delicately hedged finance across these largest investment banks. Also, and critically, and you know this better than most, Russia and China want the petrodollar standard replaced, but they're not exactly like Iraq under Saddam or Libya under Gaddafi, meaning that the military muscle assured 49 years ago for enforcing that petrodollar reserve recycling currency standard will not work this time around. Ukraine's inability to deflect Russian forces is displaying that reality bluntly.
There's so much in that that we could spend the next 2 hours unpicking it. It was brilliant in the way that you toured the horizon there. Let me ask you, as it were, a plain man's question. Why did Russia allow such a significant percentage of its reserves to be in, effectively, Western banks that could be seized, when, if you say they've been planning these kind of things for years, and they certainly must have planned this Ukraine operation for months at least, why did they not move that substantial part of their reserves out of these Western banks?
Questions, and it really speaks to the nature of counterparty risk and the gamesmanship that I referenced earlier. Russia, China, these ancient nations are used to long games, as are the wealthiest, most powerful, and most private families, dynasties, and oligarchs out west. And hence, perhaps the longer game entailed setting placements for assuring a counterparty risk for such a catastrophic event like the past month, or accelerating rate of sanctions applied and other measures of currency war applied, or of economic warfare or blockades applied, meaning that if you have your pieces set up in the other camp's domain, then, as I mentioned at the outset of the call, you want to apply sanctions against us? Fine, settle everything in rubles, as you had referenced. Oh, and by the way, you can't do that. So it will ricochet back against the institutions that carry that risk. It's been a very, this is the thing that I'm mentioning, it's forbidden from being detailed in a non-opaque fashion, certainly in the financial press, because, as you know, everything is a confidence game. So if you give indications that actually risk parameters are at exponential level higher than what is being described, even with the volatility within equity markets and elsewhere over the past month, then, why do you think the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Iranians, the Venezuelans have not just an open ear, but a policy receptivity to a non-dollar priced and traded and reserve recycled oil, natural gas, and minerals? Is because everyone kind of tacitly has an awareness, foremost including Western central banks and the private banks owning them, that there is a shelf life, if you will, to the dollar standard. It's just a matter of, trying to get out of that standard in a controlled fashion that may or may not include, central bank digital currencies, may or may not include, blockchain platforms for graduating, if you will, away from the post-Bretton Woods order. And that's really then the question of, is the East challenging the credibility of the West to have that sense of graduation away from the post-Bretton Woods order? Or are they saying, look, Russia, the first is number one in reserves as far as natural gas in the world, is number two in production. For oil, it's, I think, seventh in reserves and second in production. I'm sorry, Russia's first in both reserves and production, as seventh in oil reserves and second in oil production. And China, I don't need to tell you about their productivity capacity, manufacturing strengths, inherent wealth, ability to innovate rather than just imitate as they had in decades prior. So they're legitimately claiming the right to take the baton away from the West as far as establishing the newer monetary order. And that's really underlying the hot war, kinetic war that's happening. Those are the stakes. But because, it affects confidence, it could potentially trigger dollar flight. They're expected, it's better to keep them under wraps and just kind of keep showing these images, both, again, from the East and the West with regard to Ukraine acutely, as well as these other ancillary states. But expect the stakes, because as high as they are, to worsen macroeconomically, for stagflation to exacerbate transatlantically. And I only fear that because the stakes are so high financially from the Western perspective, there is an intolerance for allowing, hence these claims that there needs to be regime change immediately in Moscow, Putin needs to be assassinated. You speak like that, psychologically projecting the level of the stakes involved. And the stakes are not just with regard to, violating the sovereignty of nations that the West wants in NATO. They are much deeper, much longer standing, and much more macroeconomic in nature.
From all that you've said, it would seem to me that the prospect of the Russian entities allowing their debts to Western entities to go bad would be the least of the problems. This truly is the apocryphal, perhaps, lifting of a huge stone only to drop it on our own feet. It looks like our leaders have made a gigantic blunder.
You could have the smartest minds in London, in Washington, in Brussels, and in Basel. I sense the mathematical inertia of what had initially been set forth inevitably results in some level of insolvency that needs to be addressed in a fashion that in an ideal world, everyone sits at the table and negotiates. But that's intolerable because of wider geostrategic and geopolitical aims by Atlanticist nations. And hence, I sense the hot war will get much worse because the obedience that is expected out of everybody is being challenged head on by very both economically and militarily powerful nations. And by militarily, I lean more toward the sense that they're nuclear armed, unlike the previously mentioned Libya under Gaddafi, or Caracas, or Tehran, or certainly the nations that had been occupied just over the past 22 years alone. So calmer heads, adults in the room, if you will, need to really innovate in the sense of how do we avoid global catastrophe, world war, nuclear fallout, because Putin's very calculated. He's not going to just throw out the term nuclear and just for gamesmanship, considering his own population, considering the reality of responses that could result. But that is, he was essentially outlining his version of the Samson option, Israel's Samson option. Israel wasn't alone as far as like, look, if we face complete existential threats, X, Y, and Z is what we're willing to resort to. And you just had the equivalent, essentially, from the largest nation on the planet, 11 time zones, which is convinced that NATO is aiming not just to encircle it, but ultimately occupy it, regime change it, balkanize it, resource appropriate it to an exponential of what had happened during the Yeltsin years. So it's beyond an existential threat to them. And that needs to be taken very seriously by, I will emphasize this phrase, the owners of capital transatlantically. And they know who they are, and they know what the stakes are.
Pye Ian, I suspect that anyone who watched this interview will never, ever forget it. It's been a remarkable pleasure to hear you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Would the US allow Zelensky to agree a deal with Russia? Well, maybe after that interview, they might. Yes, 26, no, 74. And on YouTube, yes, 21, no, 79. Telegram, yes, 14, no, 86. Should I do another question now? In this week, in 2017, the world's oldest golf club voted to allow women members for the first time in 273 years. What was the name of the club? A, St Andrews, B, St George's, C, Muirfield. Answer after the break.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
And the answer was the good Liberals of Muirfield Golf Club, who only waited 273 years before allowing women members. Now, you saw the Killing Kelly video there. Remember, the Liverpool event this month is sold out a month before, in fact. But the Oxford Town Hall one next month is also now beginning to really pick up pace. Not quite hot cakes, but warm cakes. And I expect that that will grow rapidly over the next few weeks. So if you want to come and see me at Oxford Town Hall, show the film, answer questions, sign books and all of that, please get your tickets now. There's the details on the screen. Should I take some calls? John is in Oregon. Let me hear from him. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, George. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to speak to the very rare individuals in this world who speak truth.
Thank you, sir. Most kind.
So, George, can you believe where we are at today? Can you believe it?
It's a bit bewildering, the pace with which it's all happened.
Well, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I've sat here.
I used that phrase earlier. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And we're in those weeks. Yes. We're in those weeks now.
Yes, well, it is. And here in America, George, YouTube just announced that they've removed hundreds of channels. And I guarantee you, it will not be CNN they remove. It won't be the Associated Press, and it won't be Reuters and MSNBC and ABC. They won't be removed because they lie for this monstrosity that is, as America has become. They lie for this monstrosity of war. No, the voices they're going to remove are going to be the people that speak truth, like Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, people like yourself, George. You know, the American people are so alive here 60 years. I never would have believed if someone had told me 30 years ago. I would have never believed that my country and the pigs who have taken control of it would be capable of such monstrosities as we have seen in these past decades and continuing to today. Joe Biden is doing his part. He just announced he's going to consider a waiver for the bank Credit Suisse because they have 18,000 accounts of people that have been laundering money from drug, from torture, and from murder, and he's going to give them a waiver so they don't lose their trading status.
Amazing.
George,
amazing. I didn't know that.
I don't know what's going to happen.
I thought Credit Suisse were headed down the Swanee River, but he's rescued them, yeah?
Oh, yes, he's going to give them a waiver. YouTube is going to make sure that no American knows the truth, just like that fat pig Pompeo said. Pompeo said to the American people, I've seen him in an interview, and he said that when 99% of what Americans believe is false, then I know I'm doing a good job.
Wow.
Now, George,
he's no longer fat. I need to point that out. He's been on some kind of diet.
He did lose weight. Yes, he did lose weight.
You can put lipstick on a pig, John. Yeah, last one to you.
You could put. Well, here's what I think, George. I think that my Constitution says in its founding documents, it says that a well-informed public is necessary for our democracy to work. Hence, we have the freedom of the press. Now, when we have the CIA working overtime to make every American so stupid they couldn't find their ass with both hands, then that, to me, George, sounds directly like treason. When are the American people going to realize?
Powerful
American
people... John, thanks for that. Richard is in Mansfield. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, hi, George. You know, we are a Russian East European delicatessen based in Mansfield. We have an online site which serves Russian and Eastern European products, and we have been hit by an immense number of hate crimes over the last 3 weeks.
Wow. You there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm here, George. Yeah.
The Americans are sounding very angry tonight, but the English have every reason to be sad. And what you've just said is a pretty sad story, Richard. How long have you been in business?
We've been in business, George, for 16 years. Above our shop, we have Russian, Eastern European delicatessen, of which most probably only 5% of the products are actually made in Russia. And we have had some horrific hate crimes saying that we're going to burn your shop down, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's horrific, George.
I never expected that here, did you?
No, absolutely not. Never. And it's astonishing the narrow-mindedness of the people that ring up. But having said that, George, that the police have been immensely great all the way through this, and they hate this hate crime, and they've been great all the way through.
Has anyone been captured for it? Any arrests?
Not as I'm aware, George. Not as I'm aware at this moment. But they
and what
will.
What about your business, your takings? Have they gone down or?
Well, quite phenomenally, George. They've actually gone up.
Yeah, you see, this squares with my instinct. You know, I've been around a very long time. I can sniff the air rather acutely. I've been in this movie before, more than once, but in particular at the time of the Iraq War. I know when an atmosphere is beginning to change. And in the last few days, both from my own experiences and the experiences of friends and colleagues of mine, and now from your anecdotal evidence, that actually all is not quite what it seems. The anti-Russian hatred on one level is mass, of course. It would hardly be otherwise given the effort that's been put into it. But a significant number of British people are not persuaded.
George, absolutely. And the rhetoric of the media, the newspapers and everything are fueling this all the way through. And it is the locals that are giving these threats. And a month ago, a lot of the northern people, and any people, most probably didn't even know where Ukraine was geographically.
No,
and then
even
all
now
of a sudden,
don't. Even now don't.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly, George.
Well, I'll tell you what, Richard, I'm going to ask my wife to buy something now from your delicatessen. Everyone else, I hope, will do the same. What's your, how do we find you online?
Russian food online. Google it. We're there. babushkadeli.uk. We're there, and we're thriving.
We'll be there.
Please.
We'll be there also. Richard, thanks for that call. Cornelius in Swansea in Wales. Go ahead, Cornelius.
Evening, George.
Evening.
First of all, I got to say, if he's sorry for that gentleman that is going through such difficulties as to what's going on in his in his business, it's absolutely disgraceful. You know, I just wanted to make a quick point. In your thoughts of what the Republicans will do in the midterms, knowing that the American administration has gone to Maduro to try and buy oil, and apparently one of his representatives apparently turned around and said that they would produce oil to the Americans, but as long as America recognizes Maduro as the only legitimate leader in Venezuela. So I can't imagine Americans doing that.
Well, they might have to. They might have to. They might have to cry Uncle Sam. I think that Biden will suffer massively in November in the midterm elections. Boris Johnson might be luckier because the local elections here are more imminent before more and more and more people start to question his policy on all of these things. But I feel sure that Biden's going to take a tanking. God knows what the American economy will be like by November.
Yeah, can I just quickly say as well, George, if you don't mind, I listened to Boris Johnson being interviewed the other night on Sky with Beth Rigby or something, her name is, right?
Oh, yes.
And prior to that, I listened to Tucker Carlson on Fox News in the States talking about Victoria Newman or something regarding the biolabs.
Newland, yes, about the biolabs that I revealed here
Ukraine.
last week,
But what I found disturbing was when Rigby asked our Prime Minister, it was practically listening to that lady being questioned in the States, practically word for word, saying if Russia get their hands in it, it could be bioweapons used in the war in Ukraine and trying to boost up. Like as if our Prime Minister was even inflating the situation even more than what it actually is. Like, not actually is, but making it worse. Like,
well,
you know what I mean?
of course. And he was also wrong because the official American position on the day after I revealed this to our audience, that Russia had found these labs, was that no such labs existed. And then Victoria Nuland went in front of the Senate and under questioning admitted that not only were these labs in existence in Ukraine, 30 of them in Ukraine, 30 in one country, catching the genotype of the Slavic people of that area, which of course includes the Russians, but that the United States had paid for them. So we now have an admission that the US has paid for 30 labs conducting research on potential biological weapons in Ukraine that they didn't tell us about, and that they are now worried that these will be captured by the Russians. Well, it can't, both these things can't be true. If these are innocent labs, only researching for defensive purposes, there's no reason to worry if Russia finds them. It could only be a worry, even in theory, if they are in fact offensive biological weapons capabilities. Last word to you.
Exactly. But can I just quickly finish off, George, by saying, what do you think these four people got in common? Joe Biden, Mitt Romney, Nancy Pelosi, and John Kerry. What do you think they've all got in common?
I think they've all got children working in the Ukraine.
Jesus Christ, I can't catch you, mate. I can't catch you. They work in for oil companies that are based in the Ukraine. Can you freaking work it out, mate?
you couldn't make it up. Cornelius, thanks. A wonderful call. Rashid is in London. Go ahead, Rashid.
Hi, Mr. George. First of all, I want to congratulate you as I'm your big fan, big follower.
Thank you, sir.
I support you 100%. While you're giving people the truth word in this world. It's not only time you're talking about the truth. It is now for 20 years, more than 30 years, since you went to America for impeachment. I remember very well those days they were asking
questions. It was a good day. It was a good day, Rashid,
exactly.
Yes.
And one thing, George, I'm asking you is that when we talk about this war in Ukraine, people have forgotten what exactly happens to Middle East, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, whatever, the innocent people die.
Libya, Syria.
Libya. Instead of them stopping these wars and using the stupid attitude, why can't they think about climate change, helping innocent civilians in a better life? Refugees coming from Afghanistan, you have seen what happened. The America went to war in Afghanistan and they left everything. Mines on the streets.
Yeah.
And now they are pushing innocent Ukrainians in a situation that they cannot come out with a big power. It's because of their interest. It's not about oil. It's about their interest. They want NATO to expand. And the worst part is UK government is not thinking about the future of their own people instead of thinking about the problems outside their border.
I think that's brilliantly put. Our government, which had the opportunity after Brexit to play a very different role in the world, has burned that opportunity. And nothing that has been done by the United States is in our interest and will never be in our interest. The United States has no friends. It has only interests. And when our interests and those of others in Europe are no longer required by the United States, they will ditch them. Look how they treated Germany. Look how they treated the German Chancellor, both of them, Merkel and Schulz, over the issue of Nord Stream II and the pipeline, they openly stated that they would not allow Germany to use its own pipeline, that they were going to wreck it, and wreck it they have. So it's very much the case. Look, I'm not a Russian. My primary concern is not Russians, or my primary concern is here. I'm the leader of a political party here. Yeah. My responsibilities and duties are to the people here in the first instance. And I'm saying, as you've just said, that none of this is in our interest. All of this is against our interest. Last word to you, Rashid.
Last one, I just hope that we have to find a peaceful resolution in that crisis, and each and every human being in this world have a peaceful life.
Thank you. God bless you for that. Thank you very much indeed. Do I have to do a question? Okay, right. Perhaps the greatest of all Western films, The Searchers. What age is the guy that wrote that? Perhaps the greatest of all Western films, The Searchers, circa 1951, starring John Wayne, opened this week in 1956. Who was the female star? A. Audrey Hepburn, B. Natalie Wood, C. Grace Kelly. Answer after the break.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus. So hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Even the European, which he then owned. All over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
And the answer was the lovely Natalie Wood. Now, that went out first, that little mini documentary on Robert Maxwell on my Patreon channel. It's full of fantastic content with much, much more coming. A football podcast, Desert Island Discs, though we'll need to find a new name for that, and so on. But of course it includes the Maxwell, the monster. Now let me take a minute to say something to you. We talked about it with Jimmy Dore. Why have they not taken me down when they have taken so many others down? Well, it's first of all not a small thing to take me down. First of all, I was almost 30 years a member of the British Parliament. It would be quite a step to strike out a veteran British parliamentarian. Secondly, I'm the leader of a British political party, the Workers' Party of Britain, a registered party. I stand in parliamentary elections. I did rather well in a parliamentary by-election in the summer of last year. That would be quite a big step to strike out a leader of a British political party. And I have literally millions of followers. My Facebook following's gone up 100,000 in the last 15 or 16 days. I have 2 million easy followers on all platforms. So that's quite a big thing to do, to knock out someone with that level of following. It would not be cheap in terms of public relations, politics, and the consequences would be something more than the striking out of others would be, is all I'm saying. So that's why I really have to put it to you. First of all, if I were taken off Twitter, how would you know what I was saying? Well, when it comes to tweets, you'll be able to do that through my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. So please, if you haven't done it yet, follow me on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. But let's say, God forbid, let's say I was taken off Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. How would you watch this show? You wouldn't be able to watch it. You won't be able to watch any of the videos that I am putting out that are attracting hundreds of thousands of... I've got clips with 200,000-300,000 views arising out of these shows. But if the show didn't go out, you couldn't get the clips. So if you want to be sure of hearing me, seeing me, my videos, this show, you're going to have to follow me on Patreon. It's £1 a week, that's all. £1 a week. It's less than the price of a cup of tea in a cafe. £1 a week, and you can stop at any time that you like, and you'll be getting loads of content on it. So I need you to follow me on Patreon. So it's patreon.com/George Galloway. Okay? It's very, very important. Now, shall I go to Leeds? Sean in Leeds on Russia hysteria. Is that my old friend, Sean?
It is, George. It's fantastic to speak to you
I'm
again.
so happy that you're back in Blighty. And your team got a win today, which is unusual.
We did, and played very well, incidentally. We should have won by about 5 or 6, to be quite honest with you. So, yeah, I'd just like to say about the hysteria on the likes of the BBC and the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a propaganda catalogue that it make Joseph Goebbels green with envy. It's like something that you would have seen in Nazi Germany.
It's unprecedented, definitely, Sean. We had it at the Iraq War, but it was only the television and the newspapers. Now we've got the television and the newspapers and the big tech-controlled social media.
Yeah, correct. And thank God you're on, though, George, that we get an alternative point of view.
That's why the audiences are so big now, Sean.
Yeah, and I can't watch anything else because they've taken RT off. So even if I wanted to watch another viewpoint, I couldn't watch anywhere in the Western media.
No, you need to get a VPN. Do you know what a VPN is?
Yes, I'm in the process again.
It is important. Get a VPN. You can watch RT all day. Just claim you're in India or in Serbia. It's just a click of a button. You don't have to testify with your hand raised that you're not in Britain. Just get a VPN and you can watch. In fact, can someone get me details of how to get a VPN? Give me some names of VPNs. I think we should start to proselytize for that because this is outrageous that the station has been taken down. It's outrageous. What are they scared of?
It is. Yeah, exactly. What are they scared of? And I would just like to say as well, George, while I'm on, the BBC and the British government seem to be bragging and gloating that they're sending weapons over to the Ukraine to fight Russia.
And Liz Truss on television encouraged people to go and fight there. They've now had to rescind that. The Foreign Secretary of Britain encouraged people to go and fight there. Now the British government is saying, don't go and fight there. Look what happened to 200 mercenaries this day. They're all dead.
Yeah.
They're all dead. From Brazil, Australia, Britain, France. Mercenaries, all dead. Encouraged by Liz Truss to go to their death.
Yeah. A political pygmy.
Yeah. Of all the foreign secretaries we've had, imagine ending up with her as the foreign secretary, really.
It's unbelievable.
When I went into Parliament, Sean, we had Lord Carrington. Then we had Douglas Hurd. Then we had Malcolm Rifkind. Then we had, I think, Robin Cook. I mean, look, these are, whether you like them or not, big figures of substance. Liz Truss, a pound shop Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, heaven knows what Sergei Lavrov must have made of her when he met her there. I mean, I'd have loved to have been there to hear what he said to his staff after they'd met her. But on saying that as well with Russia, they're bragging about sending weapons to Russia. Well, don't complain then if, for example, Putin has a meeting with Republican dissidents and starts arming Republican dissidents in occupied 6 counties. Well, don't start complaining if that starts happening then.
Yeah, well,
I know it's highly unlikely.
God forbid, but that's exactly what happens. That if all bets are off, if all rules and norms are ripped up, then blowback is the result. We've been here before, Sean.
We have, yeah.
God bless you. Great to hear from you.
Yeah, you as well, George. Take care.
Thank you. We're staying in Yorkshire, East Riding. John, I think it is in, John in the East Riding in Yorkshire. Go ahead, John.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. This is the first time that I've spoken to you.
You're welcome.
Our paths did cross once, actually, although we never met because I used to teach down Commercial Road, E1. And
yes, in the East End of London. Yes.
That's correct, yes. So that's basically my background, although obviously I live up here now.
Yeah.
So look, please let me outline a couple of things to you about exactly why I'm ringing.
Yeah.
I think it's important, particularly at a time like this, that, we have a complete diversity into the punters who are actually ringing your show. And we do seem to be getting a lot more of that. My own position is that, in essence, I am a conservative, but I'm not a Boris Johnson supporter, as you've outlined quite clearly, really isn't a conservative anyway.
No.
But I'm a conservative with a small c, and C to me means conserve. And what a better time to actually think about trying to conserve than to conserve life. Now, in line with that, in line with what other people have talked about, try and look at the idea of what you actually are within this critical time that we're going through. Are you an escalator or are you a de-escalator? I'm going to give you an example of an escalator. It's this chap, Mr. Ben Wallace, who I saw talking to his members of his ex-regiment, I think it was, and he was talking about the history of the Crimea in the 1800s and the importance of British steel. Well, I'd like to send a memo to Mr. Ben Wallace. Why don't you get yourself a big wheelbarrow, fill that wheelbarrow with all these books you keep talking about, fly off to the Ukraine now, go into one of the many hospitals there, see the kids lying in hospital, and the ones that are conscious, start bringing out your history book and telling them about the importance of the history of the Crimea from the British perspective in the 1800s. He's not the only one, though.
No, he's not. He's not, but he's the only one that we've got time to hear from you this time, John. But I do hope that you'll call again either on Wednesday, if we have a midweek Moats this week. I can't tell you that right now, or next Sunday, because I'd very much like to hear more from you. But I have to go on time to the news with Elliot King.
35 people have been killed and 134 wounded in an airstrike in Lviv, close to Ukraine's border with Poland. Foreign military staff were based at the Yavoriv military centre along with Ukrainian nationals. The centre is used by NATO countries to carry out training exercises, and the attack follows Russians' warnings that NATO supply lines would be targeted. Ukraine's Defence Minister Oleksiy Reznikov has said that the foreign military instructors work on the Lviv training site. A representative for the Ministry of Defence said that they are still trying to establish if any instructors were at the facility at the time of the attack. Reuters news agency says a witness saw more than a dozen ambulances heading in the direction of the attack. At just over 15 miles from the Polish and NATO border, it would appear to be the westernmost offensive action since the invasion began. Yesterday, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called Western arms convoys to Ukraine a legitimate military target. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees could come to Britain, and each local council will get more than £10,000 per individual. Households would take in refugees would also be given £350 a month. The Housing and Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, who is in charge of the Ukrainian refugee scheme, said that the UK has now processed more than 3,000 visas for Ukrainians fleeing the war with Russia. Britons taking part in the Homes for Ukraine scheme will receive £350 a month as a thank you from the UK government. Gove said people wanting to offer up their homes and spare rooms can register their interest on Monday. However, Gove said he would not answer whether he would be offering up a room in his own house. Scotland's First Minister and her Welsh counterpart have proposed that both governments become super sponsors to Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war. Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford had written to the UK government to confirm their commitment in contributing to its community sponsorship scheme. Scotland and Wales have offered to step further to support refugees by acting as super sponsors. It is hoped that this would allow Ukrainians to come to the two countries faster. Elsewhere, a rabbi who helped Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich obtain his Portuguese citizenship has been told he cannot leave Portugal and must represent himself to authorities when required. Daniel Litvak was detained on Thursday as part of an investigation into how the former Chelsea football team owner's citizenship had been granted. The nationalisation process of several other Jewish people is also being investigated. On Friday, Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea Football Club, was sanctioned by the UK in response to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Most of the club's commercial activities have since been stopped. Coronavirus cases in China have tripled after a surge in infections in the northeast. Tighter controls have now been imposed on access to Shanghai as the country battles its worst outbreak for 2 years. Bus cities in the eastern port city of 24 million people have been suspended, and a negative COVID-19 test is required for anyone wanting to enter. Authorities reported that more than 1,900 new coronavirus cases on the Chinese mainland on Sunday, more than triple the previous day's total. Around 3/4 of those cases were in the Jin province in the northeast, where entry to the industrial city of Changchun has been suspended and families told to stay at home. A woman who ran an I Love Russia campaign in the United States has been charged with acting as an unregistered agent of the Russian government. Elena Branson, who has both an American and Russian citizenship, allegedly received tens of thousands of dollars from the Russian government to run the Russian Center in New York, which she founded in 2012. Prosecutors described the organization as a propaganda center that coordinated activities like an I Love Russia campaign promoting Russian history and culture, which was aimed at American young people. In other news, protesters demanding radical change to the Britain's Metropolitan Police have marched through central London. Activities held traffic outside New Scotland Yard yesterday before marching to Charing Cross Police Station. They carried banners reading, "Police are perpetrators." Protesters also set off bright blue smoke flares and activated 1,000 rape alarms. The protest marks a year since an unofficial gathering to pay respects to murder victim Sarah Everard saw clashes with police. It also came a day after judges ruled police breached the rights of the organisers of a planned vigil for Sarah Everard. Everard was murdered by a serving Metropolitan Police officer, Wayne Cousins. Saudi Arabia says it executed 81 men on Saturday, which is more than the whole of last year. The executed, including 7 Yemeni and 1 Syrian national, were convicted of multiple heinous crimes, including terrorism, according to state news agency SPA. Some were charged with belonging to the Islamic State group Al-Qaeda or the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Rights organisations say many do not receive fair trials in Saudi Arabia, an allegation the government rejects. Those executed were accused of plotting attacks on vital economic targets, killing or targeting members of the security forces. Other charges including kidnapping, torture, rape and smuggling weapons into the country. And finally, a poor labourer from India's Orissa state who turned to YouTube after work dried up during the COVID lockdown has become a social media star. When Isaac Munda uploaded his first YouTube video in March 2020, he was desperate. A nationwide lockdown imposed to curb COVID had brought India and the construction industry that employed him to a halt. It left workers like him who earned a daily wage struggling for a living. His children were watching a cartoon on YouTube when Munda overheard an advertisement on how people could earn money from the platform by uploading videos. So he scoured YouTube videos for tips and began with simple food videos. In his first video, Munda sits with a full plate of food, rice, dal, greens, a tomato and a chili, which he finishes in silence after greeting viewers. It didn't take off like he had hoped. He decided to give it another shot and opened a Facebook account and shared his videos there. This time, it worked. Around a dozen people watched them. Soon he had his first viral video in which he eats basi pakala, a fermented rice dish, id or sina. 2 years on his channel, Iska Munda Eating has more than 800,000 subscribers and his videos have been watched more than 100 million times. Now back to Moats, I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
A record number of votes on the poll. We're breaking the record every week now. 8,825 people have voted. Would the US allow Zelensky to agree a deal with Russia? Roughly speaking, 3/4 of the people say no. And on Telegram, that figure is 86%. We've got the highest number of calls that have come into the show. And although the show's not even yet finished, never mind a week old, we've got a record audience. So thank you very much indeed for being with me. Some news from the podcast. Believe it or not, in the past week, we've had our biggest numbers yet. February's download total has already been smashed, which means we've been in the political top 20 in the UK, Ireland, Spain, Italy, India, Russia, Denmark, Cyprus, Hungary, Qatar, Poland, Portugal, Nigeria, Egypt, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Argentina, Singapore, Sweden, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Israel. And we are still number 1 in Ghana, Oman, Namibia, Ecuador, Slovenia, Zimbabwe, and Malaysia. So remember, subscribe to this podcasting phenomenon, like so many thousands around the world, and give us, please, a good 5-star review. This is from Ali. I'm not sure which country. Can't praise you enough for bringing the reality to us and for educating us. One of my main reasons for buying an iPhone was to follow your podcasts on here. I respect your hard work, sir. I salute you. Much obliged to you for doing such great work in this day and age when mainstream media is so biased and unfair. Love you, brother. Regards, Ali. 5-star review, Ali. I'm very touched by that. Thank you very much. We've got one listener in Uganda. I think he's a Scottish fellow. He's certainly British, who's living in Uganda and working there and in a village. And I know this sounds as if it can't be true, but it is. A group of the people in the village gather round on a Sunday to listen to the mother of all talk shows in a village in Uganda. Let's go back to the calls. It's your calls now, right to the end of the show. I was insisting that the maximum number of you must get through. Martin is in County Durham. Go ahead, Martin.
Hello, George. Nice to speak to you.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to put my name forward for the next president of the Ukraine. It must be the best paying job of all time. 1.2 billion offshore account and a $31 million home in Florida.
How do we actually know that number, Martin? People say it was in the Pandora Papers. Is that right?
That's what I've heard, George, yes.
Yeah, we better actually just check that that number is right. It's almost impossible to believe that a comedian that's only been president for 2 years,
for a couple of years,
could have $1.2 billion in the bank.
Yeah.
If anyone's got further and better particulars on that, it would be good to hear it. Martin, it's not a great line, but a good call. Thanks for making it. Paul is in Ottawa. Paul, go ahead.
Thanks, George. I just talking about being a Canadian, I just want to talk about our beloved Prime Minister, sarcastically. Now, before he was even Prime Minister, I just want to bring up an action that he actually showed his true colors, and nobody should be surprised about his political stance on anything. Parliament was attacked in 2014 by a homeless nutter, killed a soldier, lost his life in a shootout. Immediately, now he just happened to turn Muslim, so as a caveat, and he had made some statements or some sort of manifesto that he supported the jihadists, but he was never affiliated with anyone. He was literally a lone nutter. Right away, Harper was ruling at the time. Trudeau was newly, not long leader of the opposition, and they said, this guy's a terrorist. We have to make legislation. And they came out with this Bill C-51, which is basically our version of the Patriot Act. It was met with high, oh my God, we gotta stop the terrorists. But it started to wane support as they started reading what it was, because it basically takes all rights away from any citizen just by labeling you a terrorist.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really slippery slope. So
it is, and and Trudeau is skiing down that slippery slope with such alacrity. It makes you wonder if he ever really was a liberal.
Oh, he never was. And you know what? The whole idea of the left and right, we have the same problem. The liberals and the conservatives are two cheeks of the same backside, as you like to say. We used to have an NDP that was strong. Jack Layton, just as a caveat, when this all happened, he stood up and said, this is not a terrorist act. This was the act of a lone nutter. We have laws that can stop this kind of stuff. We don't need to go down this path. Unfortunately, he passed away. I believe he would have ruled us if he had lived, but you know, life goes on. And
well, left and right are becoming increasingly meaningless in this context. I've been speaking over the last 24 hours to some people that would be described as being conservative figures on the right of British politics, about the need for a Liberty Alliance, an alliance for liberty, to defend free speech, to oppose state and big tech directive, diktat, as to what we can watch, what we can say, what we can read, oppose the increasingly authoritarian restrictions on our ability to have demonstrations and protests, and the cancel culture, which is at risk. I just gave a little homily there a few minutes ago about the danger of me, a near 30-year parliamentarian, being taken off social media platforms, leaving millions of followers saying, why? Where is he? What happened? You never would have believed, Paul, that this kind of atmosphere could escalate so quickly.
Well, exactly. And you know what? I hope you're right. And I hope that because you are such an outstanding figure and have been around for a very long time, you've never wavered on any of your core points. You have wavered a few times when it wasn't to things that aren't important to me. But on the big things, you will stand your ground. And that's admirable. But I think a guy like Jimmy Dore is another huge. I'm a huge
We should
fan.
make it transatlantic. We should have a Liberty Alliance that stretches from Britain to Canada to the United States and anywhere else that people are interested in. I'll report back more on that, Paul, next time. Thanks very much for a wonderful call and for your kind words. Philippa is in Bristol. Let's hear from her. Go ahead, Philippa.
Yes, hello, George. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome.
Yes, I just want to know why the media has not asked the U.S. why there obviously was gain of function going on in Wuhan. Why wouldn't it have been going on in Ukraine as well? That's a very simple connection to make, but nobody's made that connection. We know gain of function is basically a way of getting to bioweapons. There's a very fine distinction between biodefense and bioweapons. In fact, the only way it's distinguished is if the lab says, we're doing biodefense.
Exactly. It's pure sophistry. If you are working on defending yourself against bioweapons, you are developing the very agents that can, at the flick of a switch, the click of a finger, become a bioweapon.
Exactly. And that's why there's been some restrictions on gain of function. But why, if we know they funded it in Wuhan, and that's a fact now, we know they funded gain of function in Wuhan, why wouldn't they have done that in Ukraine as well? Why don't they make that connection in the media?
Well, that, of course, falls into the category of why would they? The media is a fully militarized part. I mean, they're not all getting a salary from the 77th Brigade, but they might as well be because they are all fighting as they were members of the 77th Brigade, fully paid up British soldiers with typewriters, with computers, and with radio and television microphones. There's, I think, never been a moment where the media has sunk almost completely, I'm almost going to say absolutely completely, to the occasion. They have betrayed the trust of everybody going back many years. And of course, poor Julian Assange, the only journalist amongst them, is languishing in Belmarsh jail. Philippa, thanks for the call. Lee is in Harrow. Let's hear from her. Go ahead, Lee.
Hi, George. Great show tonight.
Thank you. It's cracking, yeah.
It is. Listen, I don't even know where to start. I actually, given that we're in the middle of a war, I can't stop laughing because I just think this is beyond parody now. I saw a post this evening, I don't know if it's true or not, but it was a blog somebody'd written with a sign which says that in New York, there's a sign outside a cafe where the owner of the cafe is asking people to prove their allegiance to Ukraine by showing them social media posts before they can come in.
That's true. Proof of support of Ukraine must be shown before you can go into that restaurant.
I just think this is like a comical, it's just like, I'm lost for words.
Do you think they've maybe gone too far, though, Lee? Do you not think that people will start smelling the coffee here?
Do you know what? I think most people are starting to smell the coffee. What happens is if you go into any kind of sales pitch and you push too hard, literally in someone's face, take away all alternatives, which is what the media are doing here, cancelling RT and pushing this so hard in our face that people are thinking, no, I'm not buying it. You've got history, you've got form on this with Iraq and Libya and everything else. But there are still the odd one who are like, this is nonsense. Putin's a big bad wolf. And there are those that no matter what evidence you put in front of them, I was just speaking to somebody actually on Twitter, And he just doesn't believe there's any labs. And there's any bases. There's no NATO bases there. There's no labs there. And it's like no matter what article or what you show him.
But they just bombed a NATO base today, and we're all being told how dramatic an escalation it is. Why is there a NATO base inside Ukraine? Why? It's not in Ukraine. Why would you have a NATO base in it? No wonder Russia is worried about the encroachment of NATO. You've got bases there already when it's not even in NATO.
It isn't. And, you know, the example I always use is, let's say Iran put bases at the foot of America on the border of Mexico. I'd like to see how America would have done. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how they would have dealt with that? It's actually comical. But listen, I want to ask you something.
Iranian biolabs just over the Rio Grande. Over to you, President Biden. I mean, you've only got to state it to see how ridiculous it is.
Up and say, yeah, he would probably stand up and mix all his countries up and not know where Mexico border was and who Iran was, and probably say Iraq.
If he could stand up. Jimmy was saying earlier he gets stuck on the sofa 3 times a day. Anyway, last word to you, Lee.
Yeah, let me just ask you one question, George. So, in my opinion, I think Zelensky's lost this already. I think he's going to have to sign a peace agreement. I don't think he's got a choice. I mean, he has lost this as much as they've given him. You know, what they've done to him is what they did to the nurses here through the pandemic. Applaud them like heroes and give them a poxy 1% pay rise. They've applauded him like a hero, said they'll give him, you know...
The freedom of the city of Edinburgh.
Yeah, exactly. And
doesn't even get you a bag of chips.
But they've not given him any support. So in my opinion, he has lost this already. What's your take on that?
I have a feeling the war will be over by next Sunday, but... and I very much hope that it will be. But I do think that events are escalating very rapidly indeed. And if the Ukrainian government doesn't sign a deal quickly, there'll be no deal left to sign. There'll be no Ukrainian government left to sign it. And that would be a great pity. Thanks, Lee. Let's go to New York. Melvin is in New York. Go ahead, Melvin.
Hello, George. First of all, I'm a big fan. Been watching you for a while.
Thank you, sir.
First time I ever called, though.
Thanks.
In the 20th, it states, you could Google it, in Georgia, Georgia's planning to hold a NATO, you know, kind of like they did before all this started with NATO in Ukraine, you know, the military practices and all that. I'm wondering what your opinions on are with that. Do you think that'll escalate things even farther?
There's a real danger of Georgia being dragged into the conflict, ditto Moldova, over the breakaway territory of Transnistria. There's a real danger that this will spill over, yeah.
Okay. I was hoping for your opinion on that.
Well, NATO already, Georgia already has 2 breakaway areas, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Moldova has a breakaway province called Transnistria. You see the pattern here. The selling of the country to NATO by one part of the country, the resistance to it from another part of the country. It's pregnant with very, very frightening dangers, Melvin.
Yeah, I was wondering that myself, but I just needed to hear from somebody who might know a little more about it. I thank you for that.
I know quite a bit about Georgia. I've been there many times, in former times, but I do worry about it. There is, if this doesn't end with an agreed, an agreement in Ukraine, then there will be no reason for Russia, having been hit by these now earthquake sanctions, to stop there. I don't think that they'll go into NATO countries, the Baltics and Poland. I don't think that will happen at all. But areas that are not in NATO may find that they meet the same fate as Ukraine, because Russia feels that it's only a matter of time before Georgia tries to join NATO and NATO allows it to join. And then you've got exactly the same situation as we've got in Ukraine. The fear of US nuclear bases minutes from minutes flying time from Russia itself. It's always important, Melvin, to be able to walk a mile in the other guy's shoes, to know how it looks like from his side of the telescope. Thanks a lot, my friend. Very good of you to call. How's that? That poll's nearly at 10,000, is it? No, 9,112 people have voted in the poll, and there's still 35 minutes to go. So, as I said earlier, we've got a record number of viewers on all platforms and a staggeringly high volume on calls. Thank you if you've called in or have tried to call in. The lines have been rammed for the last 2 hours. We've also never had so many votes on the poll. So a plea, if you're watching on YouTube, please click like and subscribe to stay in touch with us and get notifications when we go live on air. Search George Galloway on YouTube to find me. Let's go back to Canada. Paul is in Ontario. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi there, George. Thanks for having me on your show. It's awesome to speak with you.
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
So my question is, seeing that in my opinion, the global capitalist financial structure has been in crisis with COVID and everything else through all this time.
Yeah.
And my opinion is that Mr. Putin knows this, and he's taken this time to challenge the West. And my question is, do you think we can look forward to seeing some kind of shift in which everybody's kind of desperate for these days, is a shift in a change. Everybody's kind of excited to see some change. Do you think we will see that?
I absolutely do. I said earlier in the show, there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. And I think we're in those weeks now. The whole military, geopolitical, economic and financial tectonic plates have just shifted. You can almost physically hear them, and things will never be the same again. The first one now will later be last, and the slow one now will later be fast, as the song says. Paul, thanks for that question, that call. VJ is in Stevenage. Let's hear from VJ. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Couple of things. One is, we're kind of close to possible nuclear war, and the rhetoric on the Western media is, Putin is evil and all this negativity, portraying him as a dark side. But then I bet that the British and American military are preparing to do something. But on the ground, for example, if a nuke's landed in London or wherever, what should people do? Nothing like that has been discussed. And separately, if Russia were to strike, let's say something happened and they had to strike, I was kind of thinking the targets would be the nuclear countries like Israel, London, Paris, and then USA. And all this is kind of, we're close to that than we were a few weeks back. I've been watching your show every week.
Yes, it's much closer. It's seconds to midnight. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, but it's much, much closer. I don't think that Israel would be struck, by the way, for a variety of reasons, but I'm certain that London and Paris and other European capitals would be. The escalation that would occur would be very rapid. If NATO were to, for example, impose a no-fly zone, and shoot down Russian aircraft, the Russians would shoot down NATO aircraft, then we'd have a full-scale shooting war, which in the beginning would be a conventional one. But if one or the other side began to lose the conventional war, they would undoubtedly escalate to battlefield nuclear weapons. And if the battlefield nuclear weapons start being fired, obviously the nuclear devastation in the first instance will be confined to the area where the battle is taking place. But of course, the radiation, you'll remember over Chernobyl, it was poisoning sheep in the mountains of Wales, all the way from Ukraine. So the radiation would, of course, affect everything and everybody. But the actual nuclear explosions would be in situ. But again, when one side felt that it was losing the exchange of battlefield nuclear weapons, it would escalate to an exchange of what are called intermediate range nuclear missiles. That is to say, missiles firing from Europe into Russia and from Russia into Europe. And of course, if that continued to escalate, there would be a full-scale nuclear exchange of intercontinental ballistic missiles, thermonuclear missiles, hypersonic nuclear missiles, unstoppable, unguardable against, that would literally end human life on this planet, and not just human life
the reason I say
planet.
Israel, George, the reason I said Israel is Israel is kind of an American proxy as well, and Americans would have already primed them to be ready if this is what's going on. In my mind, that's all this kind of thing is quite a horror show in my mind.
It's a very sobering and horrific show if this were to develop. But there are a large number of reasons why Russia would not fire nuclear weapons at Israel and vice versa. First of all, there are millions of Russians in Israel. There are many Israelis in Russia. The economic ties between the two are enormous. The historic and religious ties between the two are enormous. And of course, any nuclear weapon fired at Israel would also affect all of Russia's friends in the Arab world. Immediately in Lebanon and in Syria, they would have, having defended Syria all this time, they're not going to fire weapons at Israel that will wipe out half the people in Syria. So I don't actually believe there would be an exchange across that border. But what I have sketched out for you there is serious enough for people to think about it. Hiding under the stairs ain't going to do you any good. Now, my final general knowledge quiz. This week in 1976, now this I remember like it was yesterday, Labour leader and Prime Minister Harold Wilson announced his resignation. How long had he been Prime Minister? A year, B, 5 years, C, 8 years. Answer after the break.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis, look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view. George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
I so love that Donald Trump sketch. Brilliant. William says, nice tie, George. Thank you very much. My 4-year-old daughter bought this for me today. Well, she didn't pay for it, but she insisted that her mother buy it. And she thinks I look nice with it on. So there you go. Dave from Thailand says, we may as well not bother with the Eurovision Song Contest and just hand the 2022 title to the Ukraine. We all know they've won it, and we don't even need to hear any of the songs. That would actually be a lucky break. I've just stuck £100 on them at the bookies. Easy money. I'm surprised the bookies are giving a price on that. Very, very shrewd, Dave in Thailand. Let's go to California and talk with Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, hi. I am a big fan of you, George, and your honesty
Thank
and
you,
your
ma'am.
true news.
Thank you, ma'am.
I want to talk about the hypocrisy of the United States policy and how the nation is blinded with the facts and truth, and how is the media can manipulate the minds of the American people and to hide all the reality. And I'm so glad that you are an eye-opener for our world to reveal all the evils in the world, because it is sad how, you know, if I mention even the name Putin and the reality of the hidden facts about the start of this war, then I'll be impacted or shut down, and which is sad, because that same idea, it doesn't appear if I mention the Iraqi war or the Middle Eastern war. So that's the thing I say. How is it the world is so manipulated with the media, and how the American people, they can be pumped up with the Ukraine war, and it's okay. I am sympathized with them, of course, they're human. But the thing is, how come in the Middle East we don't see the same reality?
Well, I think we both know the answer to that, Sarah. But this war psychosis just shows it in the starkest possible relief. I mean, literally at the same time, in the same day, in the same hour, British and American bombs are laying waste to defenseless people in Yemen, whilst the countries of Britain and America and others are in literal convulsions about a far less deadly war going on in Ukraine. There's far more people killed in, you know, by this stage of the Iraq war in 2003, the number of dead civilians was in excess of 300,000. And that was less than 20 years ago, and it was us that was killing them. But people don't seem, many people, don't seem to be able to keep these two things in their mind at the same time. They cared nothing for the Iraqis. Many were cheering on the destruction of the Iraqis, whilst literally, I think it's genuine enough, are in paroxysms of grief about Ukraine. It just shows you the power of propaganda, the power of the war psychosis. Sarah in California, thank you very much indeed. I'm going next to the United States, where my erstwhile work colleague, Faran Fronczek, both of us worked for RT America until a couple of weeks ago. Now neither of us does, because RT America no longer exists. But Faran exists, and she is still broadcasting on various platforms, and very powerfully too. Faran Balanced, it's called. It's true. It is fair and balanced. Faran, welcome. I'm glad you're joining us on Zoom now. First of all, it's great to see you again. And we mustn't lose touch. How has it been adjusting to the suddenness of the disappearance of RT America?
You know, George, it's interesting here in the United States. I never thought that we would have gotten all the support that we have. For those that don't know, now I'm on Radio Sputnik and I'm co-hosting the show Fault Lines, and also probably going to be taking over for Lee Stranahan for a little bit because he recently suffered a stroke. So thoughts and prayers with him.
Indeed.
But
God bless him.
yes, and I'm hoping for a speedy recovery. But we've had so much support, and now with YouTube taking down all of the videos, you even have other journalists like Abby Martin, who used to work at RT America almost 10 years ago now, all of them getting their videos scrubbed from YouTube. And people have been reaching out to us on Twitter asking, where can we find you? You know, we want to keep this going. And it's been a lot of more of the people pushing us to keep it going, which then in turn helps us and myself want to keep speaking and raising our voices. You know, it was so interesting. The reason I called into the show earlier was just to say a comment to you. Was last night I was putting together, you know, a little bathroom cabinet. Truth be told, I love putting together furniture. You wouldn't believe it. But and I have my YouTube going and I'm watching the Jimmy Dore podcast, who him and my father actually graduated from the same high school here in the States, from Chicago, Illinois. And all of a sudden the podcast is over and then a video comes up that's a recommended YouTube video. And it starts saying, you know, we in the Congress, this is the hearing for, you know, MP George Galloway. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? I know that guy. And it was when you testified before Congress about how there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
2005,
and George, I have to tell you, it was one of the most brilliant opening speeches that I've ever, and you have a lot of brilliant speeches, but this one where you looked at these gentlemen and you called them out and they were trying to, you know, charge you with corruption for having knowledge of this, and the way that you just broke down every single point. And I just started thinking, you know, this is, we're entering now kind of that Joseph McCarthy and the Hollywood blacklist era.
We are.
You saw it yourself with weapons of mass destruction, and you were able to knock it down because you still had a powerful voice. You still do, but they're trying to now bring down our voices even more. And for those that haven't seen it, it's on your YouTube. It was one of the most brilliant things that I've ever seen in my lifetime.
God bless you for that. Thank you. It was my best day so far, I like to say. God gave me wings that day. But the McCarthy point that you make is not only apposite, actually it's an understatement, because, you know, during the McCarthy era, there was a very limited number of media outlets. Now we've got McCarthyism across multiple platforms, and McCarthyism affecting millions of people. I myself have millions of followers. If I were taken off, millions of people would no longer have the ability to watch, hear what I was saying. So it's kind of like McCarthyism on stilts, this.
Yeah. Or as we say in the United States, McCarthyism on steroids,
Yeah.
You know, because, and I'm very familiar with it because, believe it or not, back in my 7th grade year, I did a speech all about Joseph McCarthy and the Hollywood blacklist and why free speech is so important. And I won an award for it back in school.
Wow.
And, you know, seeing it now, and like you said, how it's even worse, and how, you know, the big thing that I'm seeing here, at least in the United States, is you always hear this word patriotism, and, you know, you're a Putin puppet. And I had recently just tweeted this out. I said, you know, I'm an American and I love my country and I love the freedoms that I have, or some would say the freedoms that we used to have. But the other thing is that I'm a patriot, and our government here is getting so corrupt. And I mean, it's been corrupt for a long time. And if you don't call out your government for what it's doing wrong, you're going to lose your country. You know, I'm anti-capitalism. I'm anti-big pharma. I'm anti-military industrial complex. I'm anti-war. You would think that that would be the most patriotic person, but no, now I'm tied with being a Putin puppet because I'm not towing the Ukrainian line. And again, a lot of Americans, I think, it's just being ingrained in their head of if you're not with Ukraine, then you're with Russia and you're a bad person. And there's nothing wrong with questioning your government. I had a great religion teacher growing up who said you should always question 2 things: your government and your religion. And if they question and push you back, then you're probably in a cult or in a really bad government.
That's actually quite brilliant. So how do people watch you now? They can hear you on your Sputnik radio, but are you also on some of the other platforms?
Right, YouTube, everything is fair and balanced. You have Twitter on fair and balanced, and then the other thing is everybody's pushing to Odyssey. That's the next big one where everybody's going, and they're saying that it's free speech there, but who knows how long that will last. But the point is that the fact that it's like every week something is getting taken down, or they keep moving the goalpost more and more and more.
Well, you mentioned our former colleague, Abby Martin, who actually left RT in protest at the 2014 events in Ukraine, never mind the 2022 events. So she could in no circumstances be described as a Putin puppet. But she is a magnificent journalist with a huge following, and she made 550 editions of Breaking the Set, I think it was called. Groundbreaking reportage on America, a real history of modern America on screen. And it's just all been wiped out. They literally deleted it, like throwing books on a fire.
Right. And this company, Odyssey, is actually working directly with her to get a lot of those episodes back. They're working with us at Radio Sputnik to try to get our Fault Line show back. But again, it's just scary how quickly, I believe it was, we had a guest on the show last Friday who said, I believe it was, he said, Benito Mussolini said that, fascism can also be called corporatism. And when you have it, like my friend Jimmy Dore said, when you have big pharma, the military industrial complex, and big tech, all in control of everything, and just with the push of a button, all of your hard work can go. That to me sounds like fascism.
Absolutely. Book burning. Faran Fronczek, thank you very much for joining us unexpectedly on the Mother of All Talk Shows. You'll always be a welcome guest here. We've got over 10,000 votes cast now. It's not just a record, over 10,000, it's out the park. Let's get to the next call. It's in Wales, in Neath, it's Liz. Go ahead, Liz. Liz, are you there?
Hello there.
Yes, nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
I'm reading about Sean Penn, George.
Uh-huh.
He's been filming in the Ukraine.
Has he?
And he's interviewed President Zelensky.
Uh-huh.
And I saw a clip on YouTube with him chatting to Jon Stewart of CNN, and he described Zelensky as, he said he felt he was in the presence of greatness, and this guy would go down in history as a great man. And I thought, it didn't sound like Sean Penn, but that's what he said.
Well, Sean Penn has, politically speaking, been going off the rails for quite a long time. I once had very good, friendly relations with him. I was his guest in San Francisco. We went together to Beverly Hills. We met. Sean introduced me to Warren Beatty and Annette Bening and their children. And I thought he was a friend for life, but that didn't turn out to be true. But to describe being in the presence of greatness, a guy, a comedian, who had a sitcom in which he becomes the president, who then becomes the president, and who leads Ukraine into its current disastrous, powerless situation. If that's being in the presence of greatness, then I'm afraid Sean Penn has completely lost the plot.
Yeah, I was quite shocked when I saw the clip, I must say, because I thought he was in line with yourself, but...
Well, once upon a time, but people change, Liz. Just thee and me that never changed. Thanks for the call.
Yes.
John is in London. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I feel like since the Russian-Ukraine invasion has begun, I feel like you've only been given only a particular... The people you've been inviting to speak have only been speaking from one side, which, as you say, your show is about being educative, and you don't want to repeat the same thing that happened.
Go on, John. You redress the balance.
Yes. No. So, well, what I'm trying to say is, for most of your shows, okay, well, I can redress the balance. But my point is, for when you invite people to speak on your shows, it will be good to have people from both sides speak. So that way it does.
First of all, there's a lot of people with the alternative point of view to mine. Hold on, who won't come on this show because they're not confident to debate with me. But secondly, they're on all the other shows, on all the other channels. You're supposed to be coming here, I thought, coming here to hear the alternative point of view. Because you're hearing the Ukraine side on every television, every radio, and in every newspaper. Can't you see?
Yeah, I get that. But as you say, you are supposed to do. You are supposed to be doing opposite of what's not happening on mainstream media. So if you are now giving just one opinion on
I'm giving my opinion. I'm not impartial in this. I'm giving my opinion. I have no idea. I have no idea what the callers are going to say, or what the guests are going to say.
But what I'm trying to say is, but clearly you can invite guests that will speak on both sides. Does that mean it becomes a debate rather than just a narrative?
Well,
which I understand what you say that happens.
John, it's stereo, unfortunately. Out of one speaker, which is a giant speaker, the size of the moon, which is blaring out war propaganda all over the world on all media. And there's little me on a shoestring, which I have to put together myself now, if you need to know that, and pay for myself now, giving for 3 hours the alternative point of view. I thought you'd value that. I'm sorry that you haven't. Mark is in Birmingham. Let's go with him. Mark?
Mr. Galloway, thank you. It's such a pleasure to speak with you.
And you, sir.
You've just basically knocked the first point I was going to make out of the park, because I was going to say that you should perhaps show a bit more grace to those you accuse of cowardice and not actually speaking with you, and who, well, you've actually shown a lot of grace with the last caller. Right. The first time I came across you was a few years back when you had a studio audience of the public standing Hong Kong's corner about the riots. And the mainstream propaganda at that point, and if it were not for the Ukraine crisis now, would still be fully anti-China and fully blasting that way. So I am absolutely not surprised at what is happening now regarding the Ukraine situation. For many of your listeners, they'll be surprised that that kind of propaganda does exist, and that the false narratives and the lies, etc., are being pushed. So now I'm grateful that they can perhaps think twice about what they hear.
Here's hoping.
But my question is, since the dissolution of the USSR and Axis, what is the purpose of NATO?
Well, quite. A lot of people think that NATO was set up in response to the Warsaw Pact, but in fact, NATO was set up 5 years before the Warsaw Pact, so it's the reverse of that. But once the Soviet Union collapsed and all of its allied states in Eastern Europe overthrew the socialist governments that they had and became fully fledged independent capitalist countries, it would seem to me that the existential ideological confrontation that had led to the development of NATO disappeared overnight. And indeed, the meaning of the promise given by Warren Christopher and James Baker on behalf of the US government that the NATO would not advance 1 inch, that's what they said, not 1 inch east of Eastern Germany. That was, in a way, the meaning of that was, in a way, that the efficacy, the need for NATO had effectively disappeared. But You know what it's like, I'm sure,
Well, that's
Mark.
proven to be a lie.
A very big lie. And institutions look for a role, don't they? NATO, and Donald Trump said this, that NATO's an institution looking for a war to justify its own existence.
Well, yeah, but I mean, can you imagine if Ukraine was absorbed into NATO, strategically and security-wise, for China, that would change the posture, because that is also a step nearer to their border.
Yeah.
So that would surely.
It can never
cause a
happen.
big-
I think that's the point and the meaning of this war, Mark.
No, this
Russia
but
told
it's just-
everybody, Russia told everyone unequivocally, we will never allow Ukraine to join NATO because that is an existential threat to us on our own border. It is a dagger pointed
point
right
was
at our heart.
Short-sighted nature of NATO and the US thinking. They
Yeah.
think in 3-year terms or presidential, whatever.
Yeah.
Because if that's what they're thinking. They didn't think further than that. That would cause perhaps an alliance between Russia and China if they succeeded.
Well, and that is, of course, what's happened. I need to go, Mark, because of the hour. You're a clever man. I'd like to hear from you again. Thank you for that. William is in Montana. Go ahead, William.
Hello, George. First thing, let me say it's just an absolute honor to speak with you.
Thank you, sir.
And I'd also like to say I'm getting a little paranoid. I'm 68 years old. I'm one of those people that's just crammed into a corner economically here in the U.S. I mean, I just received an $85 bill, as a matter of fact, and it's just, it's like devastating. $85, and it's going to be devastating. But let me go on here. When you were talking to Jimmy Dore and said you're a couple of the last people.
Men standing, yes.
And that is getting scary. RT America was such a beautiful program. That's the best program that's been on as far as like news and information.
Definitely.
Possibly in my lifetime. And the people that rant about it and say Russian this and whatever, they never watched it. It's obvious. It was so varied. It had such great variety, such great people, knowledgeable people. But you've gone over most of this. But I cannot believe, like I said, I'm 68 years old, and I cannot believe the amount of control and the takeover that has happened here. Do you know that there is absolutely no media form of news that I can get, and even now thumbing through my computer to find something that I think is going to be neutral or even show me anything from the other point of view, I can't even find it. And it's stunning to me, sir. It is stunning. And when you look at how long this could possibly have been being set up, with the big tech's a huge player that's getting this done. But, and right now I think this was planned, sir. Here's one of those conspiracies I'll throw out for everybody. This was a process because they forced Putin into this, in my opinion. I don't care if anybody shares it or not. But I believe this was planned for Hillary about a year after her coronation, and that didn't pull off the way they expected. So they spent 4 years lying to us with Russiagate to set up the world thinking that Putin is the devil.
William, unfortunately, I need to go, and I'm very sorry about that $78 bill. It's heartbreaking the way you put that. But you're absolutely right. The whole Russiagate was all a preparation for this. Maybe we'll explore it next week. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. I hope to see you again on Wednesday for the Moats Extra, but I can't guarantee it financially at this point. I'll stay in touch. Follow me on all my platforms, please. Good night.